The Nielsen ratings are in, and the 2025 Buffalo Bills defense will be must-see TV. I'm telling you exactly why today on the Ralph Rant. Let's go.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant, your source for hard-hitting Buffalo Bills takes. Now, here's your host of the Ralph Rant, that veteran watcher of generations of Bills teams, the prophet who predicted Josh Allen's greatness, that opinionated so-and-so you've walked out on parties because of, the Ralph.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant. I am your host, the Ralph. Thank you so much for being here. Today we are talking about the Nielsen ratings. Well, yeah, sort of those Nielsen ratings, the television types. But moreover, we're talking about Ryan Nielsen, the Bills' new senior defensive assistant, whom I believe represents the biggest change and the third huge change that's happened since the Bills got out of the drought, essentially. The first, obviously, was the arrival of Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane shortly thereafter. Both had worked together and came from the Carolina Panthers and established their scene here, and we've seen it happening ever since. The second huge event, obviously, was the draft of Josh Allen and his emergence over the years and to what he's become now, the NFL MVP. I believe this is the third big thing to happen with the Bills in this time period, and I believe it is with the defense. And we're going to talk about it because it started with Ryan Nielsen, the Bills' new senior defensive assistant. But I believe it got started with a Brandon Beane meltdown, like we maybe all had in the week that followed the latest playoff loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. And then we'll talk about how he started the fix of that, and that began with the acquisition and hire of Ryan Nielsen. And then we'll get into what you need in order to make a defense work. And I've stressed it on this show many times, and that is the game wreckers, and why I believe the Bills have acquired a set of game wreckers that are going to make this part of that biggest change we've ever seen since Josh Allen, essentially. And then we'll talk about what this might look like, what the defensive scheme is going to appear as, and what we can expect to see on game day. And then to close out the podcast, I have 5 defensively oriented predictions for you, and I think they will tell the story of how I see the season unfolding for the Bills and how it will culminate. So let's get into them all right now. We were all in shock. I mean, to me, it was like, this can't happen again. It can't happen again. Not another season of defeating the Kansas City Chiefs in the regular season, rather dramatically even, and then once again losing in the playoffs by a whisker to them. But it did happen again. I know I had a meltdown of sorts, and actually mine really started out with, and I even was guilty of this on this podcast, of accusing Dalton Kincaid of dropping the 4th down throw that would have kept the drive going. But I wear his jersey today in honor because, to be honest with you, it really wasn't his fault. And I think Brandon Beane knew that too. I think Brandon Beane knew it going in, he knew it during, and he knew it after. We could see the angst in him, and especially the, I guess, sort of very, very truthful, surprisingly truthful things he was communicating to us in the postseason press conferences, and he was being very candid about certain subjects, and you could tell there was some angst under there. And then it must have lasted throughout the offseason, because it certainly was still there the Monday after the draft when a WGR host in Buffalo had the temerity to ask him why he didn't draft a wide receiver earlier in the draft that had just occurred over the weekend. And he jumped all over them and told them, hey, you're bitching just like you were when we drafted Josh Allen. But what was interesting about it was how he actually delivered it. And you could tell Brandon Beane was still pissed underneath. And I think he had a meltdown. I think in the week that followed the loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, even before the Chiefs got their asses kicked, I think right in that week that followed, he decided, after perhaps destroying a couple of electronic devices and kind of throwing a fit and really melting down and saying finally, enough is enough. Saying we're going to do something about this. And you could tell that happened quickly because on February 5th, a week or more before the Super Bowl, the Bills hired Ryan Nielsen as senior defensive assistant. And I'm calling him the defensive line whisperer. And we'll see why when we get into the next area. But I think that was the first thing that happened with Brandon Beane. And I think you could see it now, putting together what's happened over the course of the season, what the results of that meltdown were. So let's get into it now. Stick with me. So Brandon Beane's meltdown about the defense, it's really nothing new. We've seen attempts in the past to try to get it right, bringing in hopeful game wreckers. Greg Rousseau was a high draft pick, and there were other defensive line picks over these past few years. Some that turned out, some that didn't, but none that really stood out as the game wrecker. And then he went and signed Von Miller. And of course, Von, that was actually working out. We saw it work out until the injury on Thanksgiving Day. I was at that game in Detroit. We had no idea at that moment the impact it would have. So once again, the Bills find themselves with a playoff exit and not being able to get pressure on Patrick Mahomes, in this case, when it mattered. So I think he started from scratch this time and went out and found a whisperer. And of course, we've got the safety whisperer, defensive backs whisperer, if you will, Sean McDermott. And then Al Holcomb can probably be called a linebacker whisperer. But in terms of defensive line, I think Brandon Beane went out and found a guy, and that guy was Ryan Nielsen. Now, Ryan Nielsen has been named the senior defensive assistant of the Bills. He comes to us with 6 years of defensive experience at the Saints, where he started out as a defensive line assistant, ended up as the D coordinator and assistant head coach, or co-head coach, I believe it may have been. But his defenses, and specifically the defensive lines over those years, were all top 10 in sacks and pressures, and for most of those were top 5. He also did pretty well in the other 2 stops at defensive coordinator, considering the circumstances at Atlanta and then in 2023, or 2024 rather, at Jacksonville. Now he's with Buffalo. So I believe Ryan Nielsen represents the first move that was made to get this defense to where it needed to be in order to bring the Vince to Buffalo. Other moves followed. The Bills hired Jason Rebrovich, also defensive line experience, and then Mike Pellegrino, cornerbacks coach from New England, who is a pretty big press man guy. That gives you a hint about what the defense might look like this season upcoming. We're going to get more into that later. But I think Ryan Nielsen forms the start of it, and he has quite an attitude. He's a defensive line chemist and a gym psycho, I believe. He is known for being highly detailed, highly coordinated with his defensive line schemes. Timing is a big thing. Athleticism is huge. He's a one-gap guy, and we're going to talk more about this later, but one gap meaning that his defensive linemen are normally going to fire at a selected gap as opposed to a 2-gap system where defensive linemen will be reacting to what the offensive lineman across from him is doing. So Ryan Nielsen for sure is a one-gap stylist, if you will. And I believe what he is going to bring, and which we'll talk about when we get into segments later on, is going to be looks that we haven't seen with the Bills' defense. But I believe he was the start of it, the defensive line whisperer. But you can't have a killer defense without the game wreckers. And I believe that the Bills' actions through free agency and through the draft indicate exactly the same direction that was started with the acquisition of Ryan Nielsen. Let's get into it right now. So armed with an understanding of how our new defensive line whisperer operates and what he likes to see in defensive line play, the Bills' choices in free agency and the draft become really clear as to why they selected the people that they did, because a pattern really emerges. And it started, of course, with the acquisition of Joey Bosa in the offseason. And frankly, when that first occurred, it felt sort of like a Von Miller signing. Bosa wasn't quite as old, but there are the injury questions. Maybe the Bills reaching for something, perhaps. It kind of had that feel to it. But then the Bills signed Larry Ogunjobi, defensive tackle from Pittsburgh, and then Michael Hoyt from the Rams, who is a hybrid defensive end outside linebacker. And the pattern is already emerging with these guys. And then we get into the draft where Buffalo, after the selection of Maxwell Hairston in the first round, goes and selects TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson, Deion Walker in the following 3 rounds. And it became very clear then, if you look at these guys and their measurables, because let's talk about a couple of things that all of these players have in common and why they fit into Ryan Nielsen's scheme. Let's look at the defensive ends to start it with, the edge players. Joey Bosa, Landon Jackson, for example, and of course Michael Hoyt, although he's a hybrid also. But these are all guys that are big and fast, and they're 6'4" plus, and they're all 260, 270. They are not the lighter version of edge players that we've seen the Bills have in the past. So that's your first clue. And then the second clue is that Larry Ogunjobi, TJ Sanders, Deion Walker, again, all highly athletic guys, very aggressive guys, and they are each 3 techs. Very interesting. And if you go through and look at the RAS scores of these guys, we're talking about 9, 8, 9, 9, 9, 9. These are all high scores. We just talked about Ogunjobi, Sanders, and even Dwayne Carter. Now, of course, the word about Dwayne Carter, it's been that, oh, well, he's a 3 tech, but they're trying to have him major as a 1 tech now. But you have to understand that Ryan Nielsen's scheme on the defensive line employs 3 techs all around. He wants fast, aggressive guys that are shooting gaps because it's a 1-gap style of play, and he wants them to be athletic, to be able to create disruption in the backfield. And I think Dwayne Carter's entrance into this area of playing a 1 tech position as a 3 tech, it's not so much putting him out the pasture. It's actually fitting him right in with what Ryan Nielsen likes to do. And we're going to see what he likes to do, and I'm going to talk about it in our next segment of what we can expect for the defensive schemes, because I think we've already got the game wreckers on hand. Well, with the defensive line whisperer in place and this pack of game wreckers that we have in the roster now, what can we expect this defense to look like? Well, I believe it's going to look quite a bit different and a lot more active. And I'll start off by saying that, number one, as we've mentioned before, Nielsen likes a 1-gap philosophy for the defensive line, meaning that he likes to employ big, very athletic defensive linemen who are normally 3 techs that are going to be aggressive and shoot a single gap rather than in a 2-gap scheme. A defensive lineman is going to try to absorb people and be more of a tree stump and perhaps react to whichever way an offensive lineman moves. But in this case, we're talking about 1 gap and a lot of aggression. Now, Ryan Nielsen does not accomplish his pressure with a lot of blitzing, so we're not going to see a lot of blitzing. I think we will see a lot of simulated pressure and a lot of different looks up front. Now, Buffalo has done a lot of tilt fronts we've seen where you've got a defensive lineman angled, a 3 tech, for example, angled at 45 degrees. But I think we will also see mugged A-gaps, for example, where we've got people in both A-gaps crowding the line of scrimmage and then perhaps backing off into coverage. I think you'll see a lot of stunts and loops. It's said that Ryan Nielsen likes to really specialize in coordination and timing of these moves to get them down very well, and he's been very successful with these, obviously, over the years. We can also see quite a bit of games in terms of what the Bills will pull off. For example, anything from simple, like showing an underfront and moving to an overfront, or far more complex, where you've got the likes of Michael Hoyt dropping into coverage and perhaps Taron Johnson coming inside on a pass rush. I think we're going to see a lot of very cool and very different things, and it will look very active. I can't wait to see what it looks like, but I have a feeling what it's going to look like, and that's going to lead to my 5 predictions coming up right now. All right, here we go. Prediction time on the Ralph Rant. Grab your ear flaps. These are going to be good ones. Like I said, I've got 5 predictions that I believe we will see come to fruition as the season progresses. Number 1, I believe the Bills' defense will be top 5 in pressures and sacks. Now, I've got 3 pretty good reasons for that. A couple are obvious. We've got Ryan Nielsen, the defensive line whisperer, who's got a demonstrated record of success in defensive line play and getting top numbers in both of those categories. Number 2, you've got to consider the complementary football aspect. Now, Ryan Nielsen had Drew Brees on that Saints team when he was working with that defensive line. And of course, with Drew Brees, or in our case, Josh Allen, great offensive play is going to actually create more of a need for opposing offenses to score, where there will be more opportunities for quarterback pressures and sacks, especially based on the fact that the Bills just got done scoring 30 points or more in 8 straight last season. My God, what could it be this season? But then finally, the final reason for this first prediction is the fact that 12 of the Bills' 17 games come against opponents who actually were in the top 16 or 17 in sacks given up by a team. So the Bills are playing 12 out of their 17 games against teams that liked giving up sacks last season. We'll see how it goes this season. But again, top 5 in sacks and pressures for the Bills defense. Number 2, I believe that TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson, and Deion Walker will each come out of this season with 5 sacks apiece. And one of the big reasons for this is not only the obvious, of course, with Ryan Nielsen's tutelage going for them, but the fact that Larry Ogunjobi and Michael Hoyt will be suspended for the first 6 games of the season is going to give these guys valuable playing time. Now, we saw this happen with the Bills before when Dorian Williams had to play linebacker in the place of an injured Matt Milano. And while there were worries about Dorian early on, he turns into this monster because a lot of times guys just need playing time. So I think we're going to see these 3 with 5 sacks apiece, especially with all the minutes they are going to get early in the season. Number 3, speaking of Landon Jackson, I believe Landon Jackson will project looking a lot like Max Crosby as this season goes on. They're quite similar, actually, except that Landon Jackson is a little bigger, and I think Landon Jackson is going to be a little bigger time. He's a dog, like he told Brandon Beane in the very first telephone call they had after the Bills selected him. So Landon Jackson coming out big time, looking like Max Crosby, only perhaps a bit better. Mark my words on that. Number 4, I believe that this Bills defense will be compared by week 11 to the 85 Bears defense. Yes, I said it. I believe that this Bills defense and how aggressive and successful it will be with the type of offense that we have for the complementary football aspect, I believe the comparisons will be made to the 85 Bears, and I think we will be hearing this by week 11. Ogunjobi and Hoyt, of course, return week 8 after their suspensions, and the league doesn't have a bit of film on them in a Bills uniform. So it's going to be interesting, and I think by week 11, we will be hearing these comparisons. And then finally, number 5, I believe that this Buffalo Bills defense will end up being the key to Buffalo's first Super Bowl championship and the Bills holding the Vince. Josh Allen will be great. Josh Allen is always great. But at the conclusion of the Super Bowl, history will record that the Buffalo Bills defense was not going to be denied. So I've just predicted a Bills Super Bowl championship and having it based largely on how badass this defense is going to be. So let's wait and see what's going to happen. In the meantime, if you like this content, please hit like and give me a subscribe. I love putting it together for you. I have to thank you so much for all the support we had on the stadium video. I was just amazed and love all the comments and the support and the new subscribers and the likes and so forth. So happy to see that Bills fans are out there and wanting this kind of content. Yeah, I'm that Homer. I am the Ralph, and I'll continue to be the Ralph. And I'll see you next time. And until then, go Bills. I'm out.